Leeds have won a single game since Boxing Day and owner Andrea Radrizzani knows exactly who is to blame. Wolves. Having lost 3-0 at home to the championship leaders on Wednesday, Radrizzani broke ranks as one of the men putting pressure on the Football League to place further curbs on ambition and enterprise by investigating Wolves' links to the agent Jorge Mendes. "We have our own problems, but we should play in a fair competition," he tweeted. "Not legal and fair to let one team be owned by a fund that has shares in the biggest players' agency with evident benefits, top European clubs giving players with options to buy. Why the other 23 clubs can't have the same? Isn't it obvious? They didn't have the win or ambition to do it." Fosun, the owners of Wolves, have previously been investors in Mendes's projects, and he was an advisor on their entry to English football. It is said he is acting as a de facto director of football, helping steer transfer policy, but as long as he is not interfering in selection, what is wrong with that? Wolves manager is Nuno Espirito Santo, Mendes's oldest client, but if Fosun are simply using their contacts to build a better, successful team, why is this illegal? Manchester United seem very well in with Mino Raiola, agent to Paul Pogba, Romelu Lukaku, Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Henrikh Mkhitaryan. Employing Avram Grant and Leonid Slutsky, both friends of Roman Abramovich, was once considered helpful in attracting loan players from Chelsea. Connections have always furthered football's business. Sir Alex Ferguson would send Manchester United's young reserves to management allies in the lower divisions. To ask why 24 championship clubs can't all have a share of Mendes or his equivalent is, frankly, stupid. It certainly does not explain why Leeds currently sit lower than those financial powerhouses Brentford, Millwall and Ipswich, all run on very different budgets, and to very different models. The Football League have now been bounced into saying they will revisit Wolves to remind them of the regulations, despite previously insisting no rules had been broken. They have been cowed by loud voices behind closed doors, the foolish outrage of club owners who would love nothing more than to break free of the championship, but aren't smart enough to do it. At the whiff of Premier League 2, they would pull up the drawbridge on the rest without a second thought. Wolves lost £23.2 million last season, but made £5.8 million the year before. The cost of taking the team towards promotion this season, therefore, puts them in danger of breaching the financial fair play rules of the Football League, which permit only a £39 million loss over 3 seasons, minus exemptions. This is when their rivals will hope to have their day, pushing for a block on promotion or a points deduction. Yet as long as Fosun can afford their expenditure, as long as it is invested not loaned, what is wrong? When Wolves were plummeting through the second tier in 2012-13, when they had 5 managers in 16 months, when Fosun first arrived and appointed the hideously unsuited Walter Zenga, this was all fine. The Football League doesn't care if you run your club into the ground, running it with ambition and enterprise. That is the crime these days. So Leeds are a perfect Football League entity. Big crowds, but going nowhere. They will bloat the coffers while drifting mid-table, perfectly docile. When Wolves were getting it as wrong as Leeds, they were left alone to fail, too. Let's face it, Leeds didn't lose 3-0 on Wednesday because Wolves had an unfair advantage. They had lost 3-0 to Middlesbrough the previous Friday, as well and 4-1 at home to Cardiff in February, and 4-3 to Millwall in January, and 2-1 to Newport County in the FA Cup. Leeds are in the cart because Radrizzani appointed Thomas Christiansen, who had no experience of English football, as manager, then sacked him and appointed Paul Heckingbottom, formerly of Barnsley, because he knows the territory. There is no consistency of thought, no coherent strategy, and faced with the reality of another year in the championship, Radrizzani's brightest idea is to make bogus complaints against owners smarter than he is. He will find support because the championship is full of mediocre clubs, run by mediocre minds who believe they have the right to be in the league above without devising any grand plan to achieve this. But wider backing does not mean Radrizzani is right. He wants to handicap the ambition of his rivals, until they are reduced to his level. Wolves look to have found a way out and, with this scheme, might even survive or thrive in the Premier League. Those left behind need to raise their game and their standards, not spurious questions about fairness. It's not sport's job to be a political football. Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, says the government will act with a cool head over the attacks in Salisbury. This after the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, opened up by threatening to boycott the World Cup. He watered down those comments fairly swiftly. His department briefing he meant a diplomatic boycott, rather than withdrawing the team, but it is noticeable that governments always expect sport to adhere to loftier moral standards than industry. It was the ECB, not their sponsors Vodafone, who were pressured to give Robert Mugabe a bloody nose by calling off a tour to Zimbabwe during Tony Blair's Labour government. The politicians, it seemed, were perfectly happy for Vodafone to continue dealing with their Zimbabwean telecommunications partners. Meanwhile, as cricket struggled with the expectations of the moral lead, then Foreign Secretary Jack Straw was pictured shaking hands with Mugabe at a UN reception for Thabo Mbeki, the South African president. Straw claimed it was dark and he didn't know who he was meeting. Even Team Sky didn't come up with anything as risible as that. For Spurs, like Monty, titles may never come, their time will come. That is what we always hear about Tottenham and Mauricio Pochettino. They will win a major trophy, one day. Yet that isn't necessarily true. Sport isn't so fair. Colin Montgomery's time never came in major tournament golf. Nor did Paula Radcliffe's at the Olympics. Barry Bonds never won a World Series, Dan Marino did not win a Super Bowl, and David Ferrer has won more matches on the ATP Tour than any player never to win a Grand Slam event. He was in tennis's top 10 for almost 6 years consecutively, yet, zip. So, no, it doesn't follow that it will turn out fine for Tottenham in the end. It is not written that there will be a moment of supreme vindication, a day when it all falls into place. They have to make it happen. They have to drag matches like the Champions League second leg with Juventus their way. Ferrer is now 35 and ranked 33rd in the world. Midway through his peak years he was no doubt regularly told that, almost inevitably, he would eventually win a big one. It never happened, and now looks like it never will. An even more unforgiving clock is ticking for Pochettino and Tottenham because individual ambitions are a factor, too. It is possible to assume that Harry Kane or Dele Alli might still be potent forces 5 years from now, perhaps more. Yet it cannot be guaranteed they will still be with Tottenham. Nor Pochettino. They can only last so many years on hope and ambition. Eventually a greater opportunity will arise. It was the same for Ipswich Town and Bobby Robson. They should have won the league, but did not, and circumstances changed. Robson became England's manager. John Wark left for Liverpool, Arnold Moran for Manchester United, Paul Mariner for Arsenal. It would be astonishing if the key protagonists at Tottenham now were all still with the club in 5 years' time, particularly if their luck hasn't yet changed. Claims of racism need proof to convict for the same reason that the FA could take no action against Roberto Firmino. It was impossible for UEFA to move against Spartak Moscow youth team captain Leonid Mironov. The investigators had no doubt that Ryan Brewster of Liverpool was sincere in his allegation of racial abuse against the Russian in a Champions League youth game, but could find no additional corroboration for the claim. Despite interviewing players from each team, plus the match officials, there was no evidence beyond Brewster's statement of complaint. Once Mironov denied making racist remarks, there was nowhere to go. The FA had the same problem judging the interchange between Mason Holgate and Firmino. Holgate, no doubt, thought he was racially abused. The difficulty was finding a second witness. Both Mironov and Firmino admitted using aggressive language, but denied racism. These are blurred lines, what was said, what was heard. Not every case will end in court. Whatever form Spartak Moscow may have in this area, and the ground has been partially closed over racist chanting in the past, however many instances of racism there have been in Russian football, in any fair and democratic organization these unrelated events cannot be taken as proof of a wider pattern of behavior unless you're Kick It Out. For a charity and support group that espouses the liberal trinity of equality, inclusion and tolerance, there are dictators proposing fairer trials than Kick It Out's mandarins. The organization is deeply disappointed with the findings of the independent investigation, read a statement on UEFA's decision, with this outcome likely to give further encouragement to those who wish to be abusive in the sport. What, an outcome in which an absence of substantive evidence ended in no charge? The only reason to express deep disappointment is if one presumes Mironov made racist comments. Clearly, Kick It Out does. Do they have the evidence? No. They have what UEFA had, one man's word. Denied. No court in any reasonable land would convict on such a basis. The statement continued, Kick It Out believes there are issues with clubs, such as Spartak Moscow, who have been involved in several alleged racist incidents in recent years, receiving little or no discouragement by national and international football authorities in response to allegations of racism and discrimination. This underlying issue is compounded with any action taken in relation to racist or discriminatory incidents rarely being appropriate. This current situation is intolerable. And to address this we start up kangaroo courts, in which the accused is tried and punished on the basis of one uncorroborated claim, even if denied. Whatever issues Spartak Moscow or Russian football have had in the past, the abandonment of due and fair process can never be the way forward. UEFA is not saying it does not believe Brewster, any more than the FA did not believe Holgate. In both instances, the player making the accusation was listened to, his version of events considered, but, obviously, action needs more than simply choosing sides in a case of claim versus denial. Racism is an emotive subject, but emotion alone cannot win the day. Nobody is under any illusion about the problems in Russia, and Russian football, but it is very dangerous for Kick It Out to speak as if the right to a fair hearing is merely an inconvenience to be sacrificed. Once we cut through the glib campaigns and soundbites, UEFA may still be unimpressive in their treatment of race issues, but eventually they did all they could for Brewster. They then did what they had to do. Karius could be the next De Gea. Loris Karius has the best record for clean sheets in the Champions League this season, 5 in 8 matches. Not all of that success will be down to him, obviously, and not all of the opponents were top quality. The run includes 2 matches against Maribor and the 7-0 annihilation of Spartak Moscow, but Karius also shut out Porto twice, the first Champions League goalkeeper to do so since Gianluigi Buffon of Juventus last March. Without doubt, he is getting better and more confident all the time, perhaps as a result of having a run in the team. It has been said that Jurgen Klopp needs to buy a top-level goalkeeper if he is to stand a chance of landing the title with Liverpool, but maybe Karius will train on. He isn't the first foreign keeper to find the Premier League difficult before finding his feet. The keeper, now widely acknowledged as the best in the league, and by some as the best in the world, had an incredibly shaky start here. David De Gea could make a case to be Manchester United's most valuable player, so many times has he come to their rescue recently, but his opening games were calamitous. His mistakes put United 2-0 down in the Community Shield and he had a nightmare on his Premier League debut against West Brom. He shipped 6 against Manchester City, was blamed for a 3-2 defeat by Blackburn in even 18 months and was considered culpable for a last-minute Tottenham equaliser. Sir Alex Ferguson maintained that De Gea's critics were idiots. And he made them look so because, gradually, he became the best. A performance against Real Madrid was the watershed. Now that faltering start has all but faded from memory. Who remembers De Gea as a frail specimen, weak on crosses? Nobody. We may view Karius through such rose-tinted spectacles someday. Asked about cycling's reputation post Sir Bradley Wiggins's jiffy bag, Lizzie Deignan replied, "I credit the public with enough intelligence to realize cycling goes beyond one man." Indeed. They might remember her series of missed drugs tests, too.